Our Mount Shasta Planning Commission regular meeting for Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. And we'll start with a flag salute. We have a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's see. So roll call. I'll start at this end. Vaughn Boyinger.
Here.
Belinda Higuera.
Here.
Alan Pardee.
Here.
Paul Beck.
Present.
And Tucson Sirion let us know he wasn't going to be here, as did David. See, there I go again. Vic Dowell, thank you. Melanie Findling, Chair, I'm here also. The next item is number 3, public comment, and this time is set aside for residents to address the Planning Commission on matters not included on tonight's agenda. And we don't have anybody here in the audience. I'm wondering if we have anyone queued up. Thank you, Vaughn.
Went blank.
Has anybody requested to talk to us?
Mouse.
Okay, then, understanding that no one would like to speak to us during item 3, public comment, I'm going to move on to item 4. So tonight we have a consent agenda, and this looks like a housekeeping opportunity to approve minutes. And because it's on the consent agenda, there won't be discussion. We can just have somebody move to approve them.
I move to approve the minutes on the all of the minutes for the different months on the consent agenda.
For February, May, September, and October.
I don't think I have to say that if it's.
But
Okay.
thank you.
I'll
Okay,
second.
we have a motion
I'll
from
second.
Belinda, a second from Paul. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. So the consent agenda is approved. And now we're going to item number 5, which is a recommendation of an ordinance amending chapters 18.08, 18.16, and 18.98 of the Mount Shasta Municipal Code to comply with emergency shelter regulations in state law. So I'm hoping that Todd or our consultant is available.
This is Todd. I'm in.
Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Good
Just a
evening.
little bit of issues logging in. So this is an ordinance that is required by state law, that has been required by state law since 2007, and probably should have been included in the last general plan update, but it didn't. And so before we are able to get HCD to approve the housing element that we've submitted, one of the requirements is that we pass this ordinance. So Plan West has, since they did our housing element, has been retained using some of the grant money we got from HCD, and they have put together this ordinance, and Michelle Nielsen is here from Plan West, and she's going to walk us through that.
Thank you. Please.
Hello, good evening, planning commissioners, and thanks for, and I appreciate being able to attend remotely to make this presentation to the to your commission. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I don't have too long of a presentation, but I'm hopeful this might help walk the planning commission and any members of the public who may be interested in this draft ordinance. So let's see how this goes. Sharing my screen is always a little bit of a challenge. So hopefully you're seeing a header that says, what is SB2 2007? Hopefully everybody's seen. Okay, great. So thank you. Like Todd indicated, SB2 became effective in 2008. And it was a pretty comprehensive amendment of housing element law and the state Housing Accountability Act. pertaining to, it was emergency shelters, but also transitional and supportive housing. And so what the state law requires is that each jurisdiction must identify a zone or zones where shelters are permitted without a discretionary approval, which means that there's no, that it's just an administrative action, that it's not a subjective process. The jurisdiction's existing or proposed meeting processes for emergency shelters need to be demonstrated to be objective and encourage the development of emergency shelters. And the by right zones must have sufficient capacity to meet the need for emergency shelters. So in the actually, as part of the city's fifth cycle housing element, that's the one that was for the planning period of 2014 to 2019 that was adopted, did identify the need for some updates to the city's adopted regulations for emergency shelter, but that just didn't come to pass for lack of staffing, budget, those types of constraints, which is pretty common for a lot of jurisdictions, especially small rural jurisdictions. And so what these amendments would do is just catch the city up with state law so that it meets those requirements, along with there's, of course, been more amendments specifically for emergency shelters. The bottom bullet, the sufficient capacity analysis, that was done in the draft housing element, and that analysis found the city had more than sufficient capacity in its by right zones, the R3, C1, and C2. So there's plenty of room, and that wasn't a constraint. Oh, I gotta click over here. So what is an emergency shelter? And as part of the amendments, as you probably saw reading through the package, would be to update the definition to be consistent with state law, which is temporary housing with minimal services for people who are experiencing homelessness. The term of occupancy is 6 months or less. And that no individual or household may be denied emergency shelter because of inability to pay. And then as part of a group of amendments that became effective this year, they added on this addition that emergency shelter shall include interim interventions, including but not limited to navigation center, bridge housing, and respite and recuperative care. So also bear in mind that, as mentioned in the staff report, at this point in time, there are no emergency shelters operating in Mount Shasta, nor are there any pending applications to start an emergency shelter in Mount Shasta. So this is just strictly to bring the city's regulations current with state law. So the definition that is contained in the draft amendments incorporates both of these components of state law to make it compliant. And we did receive comments from Police Chief Gibson and regarding the clarity or lack of clarity regarding the term of stay. And there really isn't any further clarification on that, except what we found was to be careful to not narrow the definition of what is an emergency shelter, which would include the 6-month occupancy. So as part of state law for emergency shelters, there are limits, local regulation of emergency shelters, and I'll go through those here. So the permit processing, development, and management standards that apply are to be objective and encourage and facilitate development or conversion of emergency shelters. May only apply development and management standards that apply to residential and commercial uses within the same zone, and may apply written objective standards related to, I'll walk through those. And then just also that they have to, by right, they have to be allowed in a zone that is by right. So requirements for use permit or variance would not comply with state law if the design review standards are not objective and don't provide a ministerial pathway to approval. That wouldn't meet the requirements of state law. If there's standards that are beyond what's the limits of state law, that will be problematic too, to comply with state law. So just kind of walking through these one by one, what can be regulated. You can regulate the maximum number of beds or persons permitted to be served. The draft ordinance incorporates the existing standard of a bed limit of 60 beds, but also as part of that, the ordinance includes language about compliance with all applicable California and local uniform housing code and building code, California fire code requirements in effect at the time. So that would be, those regulations govern occupancy load and how many people could be that are allowed in a building based on the use of the building and the size of the building and those sorts of things. And so you could have structures, someone came in to start an emergency shelter where the occupancy load that would be allowed under these regulations is lower than the 60 bed limit. And that's what would govern the bed limit. It wouldn't go over that because the occupancy load is going to supersede that. But you could also have a situation where maybe the occupancy load would be higher, but then your zoning standard of 60 bed limit would apply. So there's regarding sufficient parking to accommodate all staff working in the shelter, provided the standards do not require more parking for emergency shelters than other residential and commercial uses within the same zone. So the draft ordinance, the language in the ordinance is the emergency shelter shall provide on-site parking as determined by the planning director or their designee based on demonstrated need for on-site parking, but not more than the parking required for other residential and commercial uses within the same zone. So state law allows you to regulate the size and location of exterior and interior on-site waiting and client intake areas. So the draft ordinance has language regarding if client intake occurs on site and it needs to occur in an enclosed or an screened waiting area, and the intake area must be provided on the property to prevent queuing in the public right-of-way. The area must be at least 10% of the total square footage of the shelter and be located outside the yard setbacks. So front yard, side yard, rear yard. The provision of on-site management. The agency or organization operating the shelter shall provide on-site management during all hours when the shelter is in operation. The length of stay, but that comes out of the definition. The maximum term of stay would be 6 months. Another area that can be regulated within limits is the proximity of emergency shelters to one another. The current standard in the city's regulations is 1,000 feet separation, which exceeds the 300 feet. So the draft ordinance would amend that language to comport with state law and set a maximum radius, if you will, separation radius of 300 feet. Oh, I think I just went over this one. The size and location of the exterior on-site waiting and client intake areas. Yes, I did. And I did this one too. Whoops, I'm sorry about that. So lighting, facilities shall provide exterior lighting on pedestrian pathways and parking lot areas on the property. Lighting shall be stationary, full cutoff, downward facing hooded lighting and directed away from adjacent properties and public rights of way. And that language is taken from the city's existing standards. Security, the agency or organization operating the emergency shelter shall provide on-site security for residents, visitors, employees during all hours when the shelter is in operation, along with a standard for facilities providing secure areas for residents' personal property. If the facility were to do an outdoor storage facility, it needs to be screened and located outside the yard setbacks. So that's it as far as the presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions there may be.
Oh, let's see. Thank you. We'll start here. Paul,
good.
did you have anything? Okay. Alan?
So there's no requirement for a particular city or county or whatever to develop emergency housing. It's just we have to provide a space that's zoned to allow it.
Yes, you're absolutely correct.
And is there any further description of what minimal supportive services are?
So there's a state law does define supportive services, and I could look that up real quickly. So let's see here. But there is, but it's like connecting people with services for maybe medical services, connecting them to services for to provide what would be more permanent housing or transitional housing, connecting them to services for food like employment, those types of things.
Okay, and you say connecting them. Is there an active process that a community has to go to make that connection? I mean, I'm just curious what obligations like a city like Mount Shasta takes on in a circumstance like this.
So in terms of the obligation, it would be the obligation of the operator who would do that. And there's a lot of requirements with regarding because these emergency shelters, in addition to their construction, but their operation is very capital intensive. And it's with public money. So there's a lot of rules associated with how those funds are administered to ensure that the rules that are associated with those, typically going to be grant monies, are administered. So the obligation really is going to fall on the operator, and there's auditing and whatnot of the funding, how the funding is used, but also how the program is administered to ensure it's being, that they're serving the target population, and that they are administering in accordance to what their agreements are, because they're entering a contractual agreement to use those funds.
Okay, and lastly, for me at least, it's termed an emergency shelter, but it's not like there needs to be some form of declared emergency. Like specifically in case of you use the term experiencing homelessness. So a person like today experiencing homelessness, there's no declared emergency, but it's, right?
You're correct, yes. So usually the population is going to be people who are experiencing homelessness, but you could have, if there was an emergency in the community or in a nearby community, that an emergency shelter could be set up, or there could be one in operation. But I imagine this, Todd might be able to elaborate a little bit further on that, because he mentioned there's as we were coordinating today, that the city has warming shelters, which they don't provide beds. Probably don't usually provide beds, but there could be, if there was a disaster, there could be a situation where beds are provided. But this is more of usually the population's going to be people who are experiencing homelessness.
I see. All right.
So
Thank you.
if I can to this, to give you a little bit of the bigger picture. So we have to have a provider that wants to build a shelter in Mount Shasta and then get that approved. And typically, the majority of homeless services, including a large facility, an emergency shelter, is under construction in Wairika. And the larger cities of Siskiyou County have donated a portion of the PLHA funds to make that happen in Wairika. as opposed to having that happen here in our cities. I mean, if a provider wanted to come into town and build a shelter, I don't know if we have enough of a homeless problem that it would warrant and be in a provider's best interest to build a shelter, because they would have very low occupancy. And people tend to head up to Wairika because it's the seat of county government. They pull in the majority of state and federal funds, and it's well known that that's where the majority of homeless services are.
Yep.
So that's why people head up that way.
Great. Thanks, Todd.
Yep.
Anything else, Ellen? Okay, Belinda?
I think that we should put something in there with the security lighting, also a security cameras. I can't understand why we wouldn't require that, because of all the people that would be needing to make sure that nothing happens. And the other one is, it says in here that that we need to establish objective design standards. I assume that's on our sometime in the future agenda when we get the planner up and rolling. Is that, what do you think, Todd?
Well, I'm going to leave it to Michelle about adding that portion about security cameras. To me, that is a no-brainer. But if there's something that prevents us from putting in there, and I have no idea why that would make sense. In terms of objective zoning standards, that's correct. I don't know. It's been a while since I've talked to you all. There was a planner that we pulled on for about 3 weeks and clearly was not going to work out. We had when we did planning interviews, there was a person, and again, I'm sorry, I'm getting far afield, a planner who is absolutely incredible. We were asking questions about CEQA, and not only could he answer them off the top of his head, but he could cite the section of CEQA in which it came from. Very seasoned. He's been doing this for 40 years and making a lot more money down in Calistoga, California, but running into an issue with the city manager that's pitting department heads against each other. And, we've just really hit it off and continued conversations. He couldn't make it work with a big pay cut of 45,000. I'm sorry. $50,000, $60,000 pay cut. But he's decided that his quality of life is worth that pay cut. So we now have him on. He's incredible. He will be starting in mid-October.
Great. So we have all these little things on his list, right, for October. That's all I wanted to say, is that I just want to make sure we don't forget that piece, that we need the noise ordinance and the design standards to be brought up to code, or up to whatever they get brought up to. That's all.
I've got a running list, and I would say that there has been more than a year of benign neglect, and he will hit them all. There isn't anything that I foresee throwing at him that he cannot pick it up and run with very little research.
Thanks, Belinda. Vaughn?
Okay, I have a few questions. The first thing is just a typo on page 14, the third bullet point down.
No.
It said areas for person, property, and it should be personal, I'm guessing.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, those niggling typos when you're writing.
Yes.
You had one job to do, And okay, so my question, one of them, and we kind of nibbled around it but didn't really hit it, was what are we calling homelessness? I mean, what qualifies? Is it an emergency? Is it just itinerant? What is it? What are we identifying as homelessness that would get these types of, or qualify for these types of services?
Michelle, if you've got an answer for that, my understanding is that it's anybody that, has fallen to the level that they require shelter services.
But we don't have anything like that right now, is that right?
No, we don't.
Okay. Have we identified some place for, let's say, the type of homelessness that would be caused by some sort of extreme emergency? Have we identified locations like school gyms or anything like that?
One of the locations that we've looked at, and we plan to use, head cold, is the old National Guard base.
Okay.
Well, they used the high school during the Bowles fire.
Yeah, I would think. That's why I was asking.
Yep.
Okay, I'll move on. Is there some sort of asterisk in SB2? I didn't look over the Senate bill for something that would come under the heading for extreme emergencies that would cause an override or a waiving of the provisions of SB2?
No, there is no such thing.
Okay. Does anybody foresee that that might be something to look at? Because if there was an extreme emergency, we're not going to say, well, sorry, we just got 60 beds.
Oh, so if there's a disaster declaration or
Yeah.
in the community or, yeah. Yeah, that's not, that's not written in there. That might be us. I imagine there could be through an urgency. I have to think on that one.
I think a lot of that is addressed through the local hazard mitigation plan.
Yeah.
And I just haven't refreshed myself on that document in a while.
Okay. The how long 6 months limit. I saw in the statute, though, the part I did read where there were extensions that were given. Are we talking about extensions if they need to go beyond 6 months, given a correct set of circumstances?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'll double check the statute, but that could be written in through maybe under certain circumstances, like like the director could do an administrative, the plan director or the city manager as designee someone could apply for an extension in the event of a disaster or, yeah, I could look at research that some more. That's a good question.
Well, I mean, having been through having to evac twice in 2 years in the Napa Valley, I can tell you firsthand, I'm not seeing some of the things we probably ought to be looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move on. Page 22. I know with most of these laws, you can always exceed them. You just can't go below the thresholds. So I'm wondering on page 22 why 18.98.010 has been stricken.
1898 point. What were the last two digits, please?
Point 1.
Yeah, 010.010, page 22.
So the purpose section, if I found the right section,
Is that right?
18.9.
Purpose? You're talking about the purpose section, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, I struck it as to provide a little bit more focus as to what this is accomplishing or is intended to accomplish, to set standards for shelters that are consistent with state law. And it seemed, from my perspective, that some of these could be may be considered to wander a little bit far afield on staying within those parameters was my perspective, but that was my perspective.
Okay, well, anything that says protects health, safety, and general welfare, it's strict and is going to catch somebody's eye. It caught mine. I'm wondering if that was something we should do or not do. And I think I had the same question on page 23 under 18.98.030.
Yeah, so the physical, the physical characteristic standards incorporate the housing code, building code, fire code. That would include the plumbing code. And also, I looked up this section of the health and safety code, and I think it got amended or it got struck or something. And this section, the reference I found looked like it was out of date. But, and I think it was related to a funding program. But, I mean, the safety standards is really what we're talking about is, you know, the building itself, and that it meets code and is a safe place for clients to be, that it meets those parameters.
I mean, if the point of the exercise is to find safe places for people, they should be safe.
Right.
Okay. Lastly, I think, or almost lastly, there seems to be some back and forth. It's not congruent, like on 1898-050, where it's talking about exceeds 60 residents, but then earlier we're talking about that's the max of 60. So there's an incongruence there that I was just kind of looking at. Or an
So
inconsistency.
the previous occupancy load and bathroom facilities that is, or are you that struck or the revised, the new 50, which is common facilities and services?
Yeah. I think you've got, you know, you can have more than 60 someplace and you can't others, so probably needs to just read 60 no matter where it's at, I guess.
Yeah, maybe the thing to do is to make it clearer that when the occupancy load per the building code is lower, that needs to prevail to remove that ambiguity for the for the decision makers and for the public and for potential operators, is so that it's clear that because it sounds like there's confusion when it applies, which is understandable.
Okay, almost done.
Okay.
Everybody can breathe easy in a second. The next thing I'm going to is the hours. You struck the hours of the shelter of 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. on page 24. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, just thinking about even if you're 300 feet away from someplace, I'm just wondering what the fallout could that be for the neighbors or someplace. I don't think you want people coming and going at all hours unless there's an extreme emergency. And like I said, I haven't been in one of those. And they evac to Calistoga, of all places. I can tell you that, you do kind of don't want people coming and going after maybe 10 o'clock at night, that kind of thing. It just doesn't seem like a great idea unless there's some sort of emergency or people coming in after 10 o'clock because they just got evac'd. I mean, there's something like that maybe ought to be looked at. Short of that, I think that's all I had. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Vaughn, for your attention to all those pieces of it. So I just had a couple of questions, too. Is it safe to assume that the building standards, because we aren't saying this is residential or commercial, but would ADA requirements be a piece of what is needed in an emergency shelter, and where I don't see that spelled out, so I'm wondering how that fits in there.
So I can answer that. With the construction of any shelter, before it can open, it needs to meet California state building codes, which of course includes ADA.
don't for residential. That was the piece I wasn't sure about, if we're calling this residential or commercial or
Yes.
industrial. That's what I wondered.
Commercial, residential, they're all governed by California Building Code and the requirement for ADA.
Gotcha.
Right. And also, I would add to that is that especially in a population of people who are experiencing homelessness, there's disabilities. A lot of people have disabilities. And so having a non-ADA compliant facility probably would not be eligible for the capital funding, whether it's for construction or for operating, because then you're excluding people who that would need to access those types of services typically.
Okay. Yeah, so long as it's covered, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah.
Is the 10% of the area to be required for intake, is that a standard number?
That is, I found a couple of jurisdictions applied that and used that number, but no, it's not a standard number. I did try to research if there was one, but there wasn't really one. So and this kind of gets to the occupancy load question, where like a facility that was able to provide 60 beds, I'm not sure what the size of that structure would be, and then 10% of that, but say it's a much smaller one, it's 5,000 square feet, so 500 square feet. So, but yeah, I tried to find something to pinpoint that, but that didn't yield results, and it does get a little bit, being in rural areas sometimes, where there's more common is large urban areas, and that may not be always the best fit. So
It seemed excessive to me, with no experience, and I just wondered if we're attached to that number and if we might consider something smaller. I mean, I understand the reason to want to have that space. I'm just not sure we need that number.
maybe we could check in with what the county's, the one that's under construction, see what they're doing client intake, and also there's a regional continuum of care that they do the point time counts and some other services. I could check in with them as well to see if they have any, they might, their relationship or association with other shelters, or just may have a better knowledge base than what I've been able to tap into so far. So that could be to get something tighter that might be, I don't know if it'd be bigger or smaller or the same, but maybe better information background for you.
Hey, Michelle, can I ask you a question on this? For the benefit of, I think, of the commission too, is if we were to strike that portion because it sounds very specific, do we get ourselves crosswise with the law? Because here's what I'm thinking. If a service provider decides they're going to come into Mount Shasta, they're going to have a model for what they typically provide, and it seems to me they're going to know what's best for that size community and in a rural environment. So is it best to just remove that language and let the service provider decide with the building department and planning whether or not it meets code and whether or not it seems sufficient?
I like that personally.
Yeah, you could do that, and then maybe just retain the language that if it's it's outside the building, an exterior intake area, that it be screened and not located in the setback. So that would give the flexibility to the operator that would have more experience and also the expertise of city staff to make that evaluation while also ensuring that it's outside the setbacks and that there's screening. But be a lesser standard, so that would be consistent with state law if we took that approach, if the commission wanted to go with that approach.
Yeah,
Well,
go, Vaughn?
I think part of why that's in there, my guess from experience, is they want some place where people can go, they can get out of the elements, they can get out of the smoke, they can get out of the rain or whatever's going on, and they want that ability to have people to be able to get that protection as soon as possible. Some of them are already suffering from the elements. And so that's probably why that's in there, or in some places. Somebody's thought that ahead, or they've had to live it.
Well, I don't think, my impression of this is not really the kind of facility that we're using for a disaster, because if for a wildfire, for example, because I think in the other experience I have with that is we use the high school for the Bowles fire, and we have a wildfire. It's not like then we're going to build something in response to that wildfire that's going to take a year or two. It's this, I think, if I'm correct, this is not that population. This is dealing with population that has that's not suffering from a natural disaster. This is from other financial, mental health, domestic abuse kinds of situations.
Well, that's why I was asking about the definition of homelessness, because it could be pretty far-reaching. So I was trying to understand exactly what this is specific to. And if somebody hasn't done it yet, and we don't have that big of a group of homeless people, then I'm not sure I get we got to update this, and that's what the point of the exercise is, I guess.
Housekeeping.
Yeah.
So I think that in the ordinance and part of the requirement for the housing element is this is clearly meant for the unhoused. And if we get into a situation of a disaster, the LHMP will outline where the areas where people meet to ensure that we've got a real-time count of where everybody is and to determine where we're going to put people. And I don't think that the people from the community are necessarily going to want to be put into a homeless shelter. So I see them as two separate items. And getting back to the idea of the emergency shelter for the homeless, and it's the Planning Commission's decision. But I think that, saying that 10% is the right amount of intake facilities really is overly prescriptive, and that we need to defer to a provider that has done this many times before and let them tell us what is appropriate for a rural environment in a city with our population.
Well, using that definition, then I'm for sure thinking we need to look at not scratching through the 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. hours.
Oh, yeah, so I'd like to speak to that. So my thought about that is there's two things going on. One is if the recreation piece of noise and disturbance outside, but I also think in an emergency, and you can imagine a situation of domestic abuse where it's 2 a.m. and a mom and her kids need a place to stay, I would want to make sure those hours of operation don't interfere with their ability to get shelter.
Well, there's a night buzzer usually in those places, and they can just push
Well, I
the button,
think
because
that-
there's going to be somebody there full time.
Right, so I'm just
No.
saying that I don't want those hours to interfere.
I'm sorry to
Go
interrupt.
ahead.
As somebody that's lived up in Portland for a while, there usually are shelter hours. You don't want people coming and going, especially if it's a shelter where you're able to stay and you're not necessarily sober. They typically set hours of intake, but there also is signage that says in an emergency, these are the steps you need to follow. So it's not absolute. It's based on circumstances.
Okay, so keeping those hours, or possibly because we have some ideas about noise in town and quiet hours, maybe that would be sufficient?
So, yeah, one thing to keep in mind is, as part of the review is to ensure that it's not something, a standard that's uniquely imposed on the land use as compared to other, this area between a residential and a commercial use is kind of consistent with those, and that it's not a burden and overly burdensome, so that if an operator did come in and my background into getting into funding, like, there could be how the funding is set up. Can there might be funding that allows for daytime use, but there also could be funding that doesn't allow daytime use. Because, they need the operating funds to do this. Maybe they only have operating funds to provide a meal, an evening meal, a place to sleep, and a morning breakfast, and they don't, but they can't do a daytime service. They can't be open during those hours, but there are some funds that maybe they can do that. But where I get a little concerned is, does that meet state law? Is it exceeding what state law allows localities to regulate for shelters? And there's talks about duration.
In terms of an excessive burden?
Yeah, or just, that it's not one of the basically itemized things that is on their list. So, and that especially if it's not something that's applies to other uses in the R3 and the commercial, those two commercial zones, is where there could be some friction with state law. But also, I'm acknowledging that there probably need a little more research on my part to be fully comfortable with the response on that.
Can you have quiet hours where you specify that after this time it has to be quiet? I mean, once again, it's like the 10% of if we're saying the 10% will let the person that opens this shelter decide what is normal for them. Well, is that the same with these hours, kind of, But I mean, I really do think there should be a quiet time.
So most of these shelters, everyone that I've ever built or worked on, there are hours, they're quiet hours, and the lights are out. They're turned out as if you were in the military. You're out for the night. During the day, most people are set free and, they do their thing. But yes, there are definitely hours set where the lights are going out, and this is a privilege for you to be here, and you need to adhere to the rules. And if you don't adhere to the rules, then you need to find some other, housing.
You actually have to, in those places that I'm aware of, again, I'm familiar with that aspect of the population as well. Those people have to be there like at 6 o'clock p.m. You've got to be checked in by 6 p.m. or you miss the boat.
Exactly.
And, they do have showers and such that are available for everybody. But you're right, there's the lights out. And you don't want a bunch of people, homeless or otherwise, just milling the roads or streets when they should be in the facility.
Yeah, you're asking for trouble if you don't.
So it sounds to me like that is something that would be built into how these operate if we ever even get one.
Any provider is going to want to do that because it makes their life impossible if they don't do that.
Yeah.
And it becomes a magnet for hate.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that. One last note, in light of your effort to make things clear in the ordinance, where you repeated that emergency shelter in section uses, downtown commercial, where you've changed all those in district regulations, I'd also like to say that where we're required to say that emergency shelters shall include interventions, bridge housing, et cetera, that's only listed under definitions, and I was thinking that it would, one would also want to include that under 1898.50, common facilities and services. Otherwise, I guess it doesn't seem as explicit to me that that is a requirement. So I'd recommend adding that, unless you have a better place to add it, but, or it could be under standards. But it seemed like
Yeah.
services made more sense to me, for what it's worth.
Yeah, so to cross-pollinate the 18.98, the section, so that the premise services that may be offered are reflected, and also maybe the definition about other types of housing interventions that are in the definition that you pointed out, getting that in there so that to improve, if I'm understanding you correctly, to just make it a little easier for everybody who, the public, the staff, everybody can navigate through these and don't have to flip them everywhere into we can do that for sure.
Okay, great. That's it for me. We'll come back and talk again. I want to open it up to see if anyone from the public was interested in helping us out this evening.
I'm not seeing anybody at present. Nobody is
Well,
out
what do you know?
there.
Okay, then if there's nobody, and there's nobody in the audience that's come to speak with us tonight, then commissioners, I'm going to summarize what I thought, and I hope, and chime in. The things we talked about were that we'd want to make a provision that under certain circumstances, we could extend residency beyond 6 months, that we would want security cameras, that the language would be clarified around 60 beds maximum, except that if they were building something smaller, that code, that whatever, the building allowance occupancy requirements would supersede that. We talked about hours of operation and having, how to do that without being too prescriptive, but still, obviously, we would want quiet. But it sounds like that was built in. That we would want to, again, not so that we weren't too prescriptive, remove the 10% requirement for a queuing staging area. What did I miss?
Seemed pretty thorough to me.
I think we were talking about 18.98.030, where I'm not sure why we lined through must comply with all health standards. If this is going to be for a homeless shelter type of thing, we don't want to be doing that.
It says it someplace else.
I think,
it
my
says it
understanding is
several
it was
places,
it was
we've been
built
lying
in elsewhere?
Yeah.
I mean, again, we're trying to get to making it easy for the public and easy for everybody to read. If we have it, if it's adequately included, or do we need to make a change?
Yes, I can double check that section, and if there's something missing, if there's something unique about that health and safety code section, I can move that text to be under part of the physical characteristics so that it's represented there.
Oh, hang on, we can't hear you
sorry.
because the train's going by. That might have done it. Okay, I'm sorry, could you repeat that last statement, please?
Yeah, no problem. I will, the health and safety code standard, under 18.98.030, if there's content in there that is not in provisions that would apply that are not reflected by a building code, the fire code, I will add it to the physical characteristics to ensure that there's not any potential safety issues if that were to be missed and not included.
Okay, and you got the, right.
Yeah.
And the one about, did I mention the one about including the definition for,
Homelessness.
oh,
We need
so
to really
there-
button that one down.
We're not going to get there.
I mean, we had that study about homelessness, and we had those definitions. Okay, we have the part about, did I mention repeating the part about services that shall be required? Do you have that in there, in our list? Moving that, duplicating that in the facilities and services
Yes, the services that
that are required. Okay.
that can be required, yes, yeah.
So can I ask a question just for, so I understand intent? Requesting a definition for homelessness serves what purpose? Because the people that tend to go to a shelter are self-referential, and they're there because they don't have any other options. And if we have a prescriptive definition, are we really going to apply it?
Well, it depends. That's the point. It depends on who's claiming that they're homeless and for what reason. And what services are we going to limit because of however it is or isn't defined.
Okay, so my
I mean,
question
we've already
is,
identified 3 different reasons why somebody could be homeless, where spousal abuse, or they're just out on the street for God knows why, unfortunately, or for some sort of unfortunate or disaster of one form or another.
Who wouldn't you let in?
right, and that's the thing.
That's the
is
discriminatory or,
I'm just saying, probably wouldn't hurt to put that in there then, or
and
whatever
I
it
also
is.
I thought we were supposed to call people unhoused these days, not homeless.
Well, you can call them whatever you want.
I
Either
don't know.
way, whatever you call them, if they're showing up to that shelter saying they need services, they're going to get help.
Yep.
Nobody's coming into a shelter because they want to avoid paying motel taxes or motel fees. I mean, so if you're showing up there, you need help, you're going to get help. So I think that trying to define homelessness is overly prescriptive.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I think it would be onerous on the people that are going there seeking help.
Yeah, we're not wanting to do that, and I don't think they're gonna care if you call them unhoused or homeless, they just want a place to live, so,
Thank you. Thank
To
you.
stay.
Yep.
To stay, not live. This is not a.
Yeah,
well,
Yep.
That's a different thing, and it's so restrictive, like being shut down at 6 o'clock, you have to be in there. And there's a whole lot of people that, whether they have a house or not, don't want to do that.
Well, and let's talk about this a second. And it's somewhat of an un-PC conversation, but you're in a situation where people are in different states of distress because of mental illness, because of their drug addiction, and you have strict requirements for when you go to sleep and when you wake up. The idea that somebody is going to subject themselves to an extremely uncomfortable environment means that you are in dire circumstances. And to me, that means you serve them.
most of these folks know where they have to be by what time. That's the one thing that they can do if they need some place to stay. You'd be amazed at how focused some of those folks can be.
Yeah, but I don't understand what that means.
Not following. If
By
somebody
6
shows up,
PM, if you say, hey, you got to be there by 6 PM, those people know that they have to be there by 6 PM.
Yeah.
They know that.
and so what? I mean, so I don't mean to be flippant, but if you're showing up there and you say you need services, the service provider isn't going to grill that person based on their circumstances, whether or not they can stay there. That's absurd.
No, I don't think that's what we're saying, or at least not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is, somebody asked the question, why would you set the time at 6? And I think I was responding to that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a provider question when we get to that point. And, when we get, if we ever, I don't think we're going to get to this point. When we get to a shelter, it doesn't make sense here. That's all stuff that's going to be, given our community, any provider coming in is going to be subjected to a million questions.
Yeah.
And if they're not meeting the mark, they're going to comply.
So it sounds to me like we've gotten far enough along, perhaps. It sounds like staff has listened and our consultant have listened to our suggestions and is going to take those. I think we also, just to make sure, commissioners reviewed the findings, that everybody feels comfortable with the findings. They're on, going from page 17 to 18 that we'd forward to City Council. And if there's no questions about that, I'd be interested in a motion.
I do, go ahead.
Isn't our next, this is our final go at it, though. We give recommendations tonight, and that's our chance to give recommendations, correct?
This
We don't
doesn't
get-
come back to us.
It does come back to us.
No, it doesn't. I don't
That's what I
think.
was saying.
Right, I believe that this is the, staff recommendation is that we receive and consider comments, we provide staff with suggestions, and then we send it off to City Council.
Right.
Yes?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so there is something we haven't, since we're talking about homeless shelters, we haven't discussed pets, animals, dogs. Most people won't stay in a shelter if they can't bring their pet with them.
That's a countywide problem because I work with Rescue Ranch, and there is no solution to that at this stage unless a shelter has the room to take somebody's dog while they go to they go in. But you cannot have a
Like a kennel or
homeless
something,
shelter
maybe?
handle dogs because it's a whole another
Then
problem.
a lot of these folks won't use the shelter if they
Well,
can't.
that's
Yeah.
a choice they make too.
That's a great, Michelle is,
Yeah.
is the state, are they agnostic on that? Have they weighed in?
There is a recognition of that for people to access services. The lack of accommodation of pets is a big problem that people, just as has been pointed out in the discussion, that people will not make use of a shelter or other services if they can't bring their pet. But it is, I did read today that that could be an amenity that's encouraged, but for the by right shelters in the by right zones, it's too steep of a barrier to make it a mandatory amenity. But
Nice liability issue for the city.
A potential provider that wanted to develop a shelter here, though, could make that provision if they just so chose to, correct?
correct. Yeah.
As long as they carry an awful lot of
Insurance.
general liability insurance.
True.
There's so many things with that. I mean, is the dog got rabies and licensed and, oh my gosh.
Yeah, tough stuff, for sure.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. Too many dogs is what it is, too many animals.
Yeah,
Great
people
point.
But
love their
we've
animals.
talked about it at Rescue Ranch, is whether we could take in somebody that had domestic abuse issues and take in the pets of that person so they could be safe and their pets could be safe. But there have 180 dogs at Rescue Ranch. They are at the point where they they need to cut back. And so there, if you get this one domestic abuse or this one or two homeless people with animals, yet they are on the, they have made the choice to have these animals, and there's no way, everybody's totally in trouble. It's really in trouble. It's nobody's to blame. I mean, nobody's bad. It's just trouble. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's a horribly sad situation, the number of dogs.
Yeah.
So it'd be wonderful if somebody wanted to open up another shelter for dogs. That'd be great. But, there's no money in it. There's no money for it. So,
Anything else? Go ahead, Michelle, did you have something?
I was just going to say at one point, the state, they did have a funding program. It wasn't very much, but to provide accommodations at shelters for dogs, for providers, a pool money. But it already ran out, so it doesn't look like it's going to be renewed. But there's an awareness now. But yeah, I think a lot of the things that being pointed out here are, liability and very difficult situation for everybody.
Yeah.
And
Would there be
Yeah.
referrals for Section 8 housing for these folks?
that could be a service that could be provided, and to connect them with, how to qualify, like do the income verification and for places that would be available for them to rent potentially. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try again. Anything else that we want to talk about and ask staff and our consultant to look into? If not, do we have a motion? From anybody? So we were directed to, on page 15,
Yes. We make a motion that we have received the staff report and considered the comments from the public and have provided direction to staff and recommend that the city council make the required findings and adopt the amendments to the Mount Shasta Land Development Code.
I second it.
Thank you. We have a second from Vaughn. Motion from Belinda. All in favor? Aye.
Aye, yes.
Opposed? None. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much for your help on this for us.
Thank you for the great discussion and really good questions, very insightful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bell.
Thanks.
Okay, our item 6, commission and staff comments. Todd, anything else you'd like to share about news in the city?
I'm just elated that we've got this guy that, we've got some great planners in Siskiyou County, Rico being one, Juliana another. And this isn't meant to take away from their immense skills. This person that we hired is like finding a pink unicorn. I don't think we'll find somebody with this levels of talent north of Sacramento. So I'm excited. I'm very excited.
You can tell.
Yes, we can tell.
Don't get too excited yet. Just cross your fingers.
Are we providing housing for this person to offset the loss of income?
So we're providing a relocation allowance, and I managed to get council to raise the salary considerably, on par with our engineer, public works director, which is higher than anybody else that's a planning director in Siskiyou County. But that again is, $45,000 still lower. But he's willing to make that hit. One of the things that he's hoping for, his wife is working in medical offices. He's looking for help, trying to see if we can drum up some opportunities for her. So there's that. I'm excited. There's one other thing that is huge news, and I don't want to be really nerdy on this, but I think I've talked to you about tax increment finance and enhanced infrastructure finance districts in the past. And you guys are familiar that it's about once you go through all the hoops that you need to jump, you can designate certain parcels as part of an EIFD, an enhanced infrastructure finance district. They don't need to be contiguous parcels. And if the city was to go it alone, it would take about 8 years once we create the district for us to generate enough excess property tax revenue that normally come to the city to plow back into the district to allow us to put infrastructure on places like the landing. And kind of a far-fetched dream was, we've got a very conservative board of supervisors. Let's see if the county will join us in a partnership to help backstop through that partnership their general fund for the EIFD, that instead of 8 to 9 years generating enough tax increment to allow us to build infrastructure, it would take, once the district is formed, about 3 years. And I've made a couple presentations to the Board of Supervisors. I made a second presentation last week with the consulting firm that is really the experts in the state and have formed all the EIFDs. The two of us made an 1.5-hour pitch to the Board of Supervisors, and to my surprise, they voted 4-1 to go down that road. And so we're working on articles of incorporation, which is a non-binding resolution that needs to be brought to council. It's going to be drafted. We're bringing it soon as council passes it. We needed to get to the Board of Supervisors, have them approve it. It then goes to the State Public Financing Board for approval. Part of that is a requirement to come up with a infrastructure financing plan, which involves identifying all the parcels that we would include in this district, which is pretty complicated. There are a lot of nuances to it. The county has talked about, let me back up. We have been working on trying to annex the one Shasta site into the city, and we've gotten intimations from the Board of Supervisors that they don't want to let that go. And that would be part of that EIFD. But one of the things I don't think the county realizes yet is if they keep that parcel under an EIFD partnership, they have to fund it on their own through tax increment finance that they harvest. And they're also responsible for any infrastructure they put in that goes south. And I don't know if they want to take that burden on, especially since, they're connected to Mount Shasta City Services or adjacent to. Anyway, so there's a lot of parcels they want to include. There's the orchard, there's the Newman property. There is a property that the county suggested that we include that's right across from the CHP station. It's the entire landing. I know I'm missing one. And so there's going to be negotiations about what parcels are included. And, it's going to take about a year to form this district. If it goes all the way through, and it's not done until it's done. But in the meantime, I've had conversations for more than a year now with a gentleman who has 4 facilities up and down the West Coast that built modular structures, like for the U of O dormitory. They'll build like a 4-story dormitory on its side, which cuts down on environmental waste, but it will create 35 blue-collar jobs here that pay, living wages, and 5 white-collar jobs on the landing site. He wants to purchase the entire thing, and on top of that manufacturing, it'd be a small portion of that site, but the rest of it, he wants to build a combination of workforce housing and market rate housing. So, my discussion with him is, and we're allowed to do this under state financing laws, is if we're in the process of incorporating this district as an EIFD, as soon as it's formed, I can sign an agreement with this gentleman, have him pay for the infrastructure for the site, and get moving. As long, we're gonna have fights from the traditional anti-growthers, and we need to get through that. But I can sign an agreement with him that says, all right, we have this EIFD formed. If you put the infrastructure in now, we've got a promissory note that we will pay you back once we have enough increment to fund the infrastructure on that site. And so, we could be seeing development on that site, barring some obstacles that we're used to seeing in the next 2 years.
Wow.
Question.
Sure. Belinda?
I have a question. So will we be the planning commission for these events, so to speak? Or is it going to be a different planning commission, or was it going to be the county planning commission?
Depends.
So it's our enhanced infrastructure finance district. We pay for the formation of it. The county's backstopping their general fund. How they get paid is in the back end. A district is usually formed for somewhere between 30 and 50 years. Okay. And when we start seeing tax revenues coming back, once we build enough increment and we see development, and as we all know, good development breeds other good development. Any excess property tax revenue later on in the district and after in perpetuity after the district closes, would see 50% of that property tax.
And your question about planning commission is for the
Are we to
development. So the development would still, if there were construction
Oh,
and so on,
I'm
that would
sorry.
still be within the city, it's ours. If it's out, would there be county parcels? It sounded, I only heard city parcels. Are there county parcels they would include in this district as well?
So that was my spiel, and it was probably a little bit opaque, is whether or not the county allows us to annex the one Shasta site. That would, if they don't, that would be under county control for approval. Now, I'm about to sign an agreement with the owner of One Shasta for the placement of a water tank and the right height to provide gravity feed as redundant water to the city of Mount Shasta in exchange for them, giving me site control, and they own it. As long as we promise up to a certain CFU flow for full build out of their site as well. And it's a boon. This is something they're not asking for anything in return other than us providing tank capacity to serve their site. So we've had to double the size of the tank. That's it. This is a good deal.
Is that the water plant?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, up on Ski Village, yeah.
Yeah, this is the Deck 6 well.
Okay.
Okay. But did my question get answered?
That if it's the city, if
If
there's,
it is,
if it's in the city, it would
so
be,
Roseburg would still be under our purview,
Any
right?
city-owned property, any development that happens would come before the planning commission.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure it didn't go to the county.
If it is the county.
No.
Well,
Yeah, if it is the county, it will. I understand that, yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Well, that's
Wow.
exciting.
You've been a
Yes, it is.
busy guy.
Yeah, you've been working hard.
Yeah, I'm a pessimist by nature, and I've got a little hint of optimism in there. But the fact that we've gotten this far is incredible to me. I mean, the first presentation to the Board of Supervisors was clearly, I want to be careful here. It's many folks read that the county administrator and the deputy county administrator are working against this. And the first time I presented, there was very little information in a staff report provided to the board. So I walked in and was very surprised that they weren't briefed on what a EIFD even is. And I provided elaborate, low, moderate, and high projections on what they're going to see if they join us. None of that stuff made it into the staff report. So I had to explain what tax increment finance was from the beginning. And in this last presentation last week, the deputy CAO, they're wonderful people. I'm not knocking them. They're great people. But the deputy CAO who is running finance, it had a bent that was clearly, let's not do this. And I don't know what the motivation is, but between Joe Dieguez at Cosmont and his MIT background, and the fact that Cosmont are the folks that are the ones that have incorporated all the EIFDs in the state since it became tax increment finance light. This is an old tool. It's just changed a little bit, and schools are not part of that tax increment that we can reap. But you know, and letting them know that I've spent a number of years as a director at the Portland Development Commission, building out the South Waterfront, the Portland State University urban renewal area, and the PSU South Park Blocks urban renewal area, especially the South Waterfront, which was a huge Superfund EPA site because of the barge building there, and getting that to the point where it's built out to where it is now. I know what I'm doing, and Joe's very humble presentation that was clear about this. These are the impacts that are good, bad, and indifferent, and laying it out in a very even way. I think it sold the day. So I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation and try to meet the county's needs so they see the win in the long run. And as long as we're honest brokers, I think this is going to happen.
Lovely. Thank you.
I'm psyched. Sorry, I don't look like it, but I'm like, I assume everything's going to go south always. I think it's maybe my time in the military, but I'm like, I
I hope it does not for you.
This is historic. This could be really historic. Anyway, I'm not going to oversell it, but that's my take.
Well, looking forward to updates when you have them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share with us? Those were pretty big.
There's so much going on. I don't even know where to start.
The nest.
Well, I mean, there's a ton. I mean, we now have a working group, an ad hoc committee. Let me back up. So you know that there has been this push to turn Chestnut and Mount Shasta Boulevard into one-ways and to daylight Casa. And me and my experience in the transportation world, 8 out of 10 couplets, which is what one-way streets that meet on either side are, don't work, and people want to put them back in the bottle. Some do. Ashland's a great example. But you look at the Burnside Cooch couplet up in Portland and a whole bunch of others that are miserable failures. So I'm suspending, my bias in here. We had Pace Engineering look at it, and and I'm not going to knock engineers because they do wonderful work. They're very smart. But if you get an engineer to try to design a 100-year flood retention basin, it's going to be square and have chain link fence around it. And we had them look at it, and it was overbuilt and non-aesthetic. And they were performatively against it from the beginning. So what I did is pitch to council that we need to start from a design perspective and then force the engineering company to come in afterwards and make it work. All right.
Engineering,
so we have an ad
a different engineering company?
Well, I'm going to go for a different engineering company because their main transportation engineer before this work ever started, it was a wonderful guy who was coming back from the gym workout before work, and he had a heart attack in his car and passed away. So they put somebody on that isn't necessarily a traffic-based engineer. I'm probably going to farm this out to somebody else that is more context-friendly, design-oriented, and will help us see our vision through. But I have concerns. It requires us to go down to one lane in either direction and provide angled parking so we get all the parking we need back. And my major concern is that we would need a light at the corner of Chestnut and Lake Street during the PM hours, and we need to signalize it, because right now it operates as a level of service A or B. And in the PM peak with one lane, it would operate at a level of service D or F. So that concerns me. That's not something that we can't surmount. My other concern is if we're providing one lane and angled in parking on either side of Chestnut and Mount Shasta Boulevard, is if we need to evacuate during a fire or another emergency, how the heck are we going to get all those angled parking vehicles out of the way so we can open it up to get as many people out of town as possible? Those are my concerns.
Do we add bicycles and other wheeled transportation to this mix?
So the, and that brings me to the other point on this is, you know, when kicking this ad hoc meeting off, I said, you know, this is great. You can desire one-way streets, but nobody is going to give you a grant for something that's aesthetic because it's going to cost millions of dollars. You have to have a reason to sell it. And the only money that's going to be available to us is if we do extensive active transportation upgrades, including protected bike lanes, widening sidewalks, ADA ramps, et cetera. And we need to make it clear that that is a large part of what we're trying to do when creating these one-way streets, or we'll never get grant money.
And roundabouts to manage some of the flow, the traffic?
It wouldn't be part of this section. We're looking at other, you know, areas in town, Mount Shasta Boulevard, at, you know, north. But, you know, the other piece is castle daylighting. It's a great idea. I am not tapped into grant sources that will fund that sort of work. Yeah, because it's not really solving any problem unless that we argued that it was a demonstration project for water filtration and cutting down on hazardous pollutions. And Tom Hesseldins has now been retained by the city at my request to help us with this. He has some sources. There's the McConnell Foundation, some others that will pay for aesthetic treatments. And so we're treating the one-ways as one grant opportunity, and we're treating the Castle Creek daylighting as another opportunity that would be chasing different sets of grants.
Talking about that project as long as I've known him, you know?
I know. And I think that Castle Creek daylighting is very doable. I think the big thing is the auto yard and where we move the parking over there, and what do we do for Ramshaw's. Those are the two linchpins, and we need to satisfy them or it's never going to fly. But we're in conversations with both owners, and we're going to bring them to the next ad hoc committee meeting and let them vent.
Your angled parking, head in or back in?
Head in. With, and my proposal is that we do protected bike lanes with what are called rubber duckies or some other kind of separation, whether it's a cement, 6-inch divider that allows for separated bike lanes, but in front of the vehicles, and curb stops that don't allow bumpers to intrude into that bike lane.
Okay. Interesting stuff,
Wow.
for sure. Exciting stuff.
I'm psyched. It could really change the face of downtown. I am concerned about the fire evacuation piece. Hopefully we can resolve that. And we'll see. And we'll chase grants. But we're never going to get a grant because the grant funding du jour these days is anything with an active transportation component. If you're doing something, an expensive roadway project that you're not actually creating excess capacity or solving multimodal transportation, you'll never get.
If 8 out of 10 times these couplets don't work, are you also looking at other options to, I don't know, make Chestnut Street more included without using one-ways?
That becomes, that's plan B. And I feel like if we keep it the way it is, and we don't do angled in parking, but keep parallel parking, we have an opportunity to provide separated bike lanes on its own. And that's going to be an easier grant to get.
Ashland, in the couplet took a long time before it started to, let's say, work, in terms of attracting new development and businesses that are up close and the feel of an urban environment. They started doing, I was 8 or 9 or something like that when they did that, and it's a long-term bet,
It is. And so here's my argument too, and I've been saying this till I'm blue in the face, and I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but the impetus for the idea of a couplet is that you want to activate Chestnut Street more. And the reason Chestnut Street isn't activated, in my view, is because there are businesses there that are in residential structures that don't hold the street line like typical commercial does. And unless you have that that design language there, you need to resort to something else, and that's not going to resolve until those buildings are demolished and rebuilt over time, and we're keeping the street lines clearly commercial. But, instead of spending all this money on one-way streets, if you want to activate Chestnut, in my mind, what you need to do is work on good urban design and better street trees, benches, pedestrian level lighting that will pull people onto that side and get them walking so they see what's happening behind the treatments that you put up near the sidewalks.
Getting Castle Creek, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Street.
Cold Creek on Castle Street.
Yeah, right.
Would that improvement run all the way up to the meadow? I would think it should.
We haven't decided that yet. There are different
Ideas, whatever.
that we're working through.
It seems to me that could be a vehicle for pulling people up on a Chestnut itself, that
Agreed.
improvement.
Totally agreed. And not to get too down the rabbit hole, but on the south side of Castle, since it's city-owned property and we could find enough parking for the folks that are gonna, they want to make sure they're made whole, is if we could take over that one section of Castle on the south side and actually construct something where, whether it's a restaurant, whatever it is, and you angle it and you have a rooftop structure on there, you will have the best views of Mount Shasta and an absolutely successful venue, because you'll be able to have diners up there, people,
Is the
so anyway.
north side of the street, not the south side,
The northeast side.
where that existing
Yeah.
parking is
Yeah.
up against
North
Beers.
side.
Yeah, Yep.
Yeah, yep.
yeah, I agree. Good ideas.
That sounds great. Oh, all right. Anything else?
That's it.
Well, lovely. Thank you. Commissioners, Vaughn,
Nothing.
Belinda?
I have something nice to say. I've had 3 different situations with Public Works, 3 different people, me and then a friend and then another person. Great.
I'll pass it on to-
Such a huge improvement from a past Public Works. I tell you, they
get
call,
paid.
they answer, they solve problems, rather than ignoring you and giving you the stink eye. So, there you go.
Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Ken. Ken is extremely public service oriented. He's very customer service focused. Sorry, I've got a giant Maine Coon kitten that is chewing my leg because he hasn't been fed.
That matches your shirt.
But anyway, I wanted to let you know that I've been doing, the city's public works departments for many years, and today 3 things happened that were super positive, and I wanted to let everybody out there in the world know that it's a vast improvement. That's all I
Good.
have to say.
I'll pass it along to
And-
Ken. I'm sure he'll appreciate it.
And the Abundant Life Church out there on Old Stage is abandoned. Do you know that? It's Old Stage in Lassen. I'm going, what can we do?
Outside of the city.
I know, but people need to think about it. Okay,
Good
that's
idea.
it. Bye.
Alan? Nothing? Paul?
Yeah, two things. One, a public service announcement, and then a question for Todd.
Yeah.
Firstly, every Thursday from 3 to 5 at St. Anthony's, they serve meals. So if you want a meal or you can't afford one, there's no restrictions on who can go there and get one, and it's absolutely free. So this week will be stir fry. Anyway, my question to you is, what's going on with the apartment developments on Chestnut that we approved back in the late winter, early spring? Affordable housing, sorry.
So I had council last night, and the remaining sticking point was to vacate half of Field Street, which took some doing in terms of all the noticing requirements that passed. Danco is now ready to, they've been working on preliminary design. They need to close the loan documents on it. And other than that, it's all, all systems go.
Think they'll break ground.
Yep. I haven't gotten a time frame
Okay.
yet, but we're working through some weird paperwork issues with their lender that I'm hoping we can resolve this week.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Just a couple, just because somebody else asked, any word on the nest?
The nest.
It's a short one.
So the nest was up for bid. It went through the receivership process. Believe it or not, the high bidder was Cliff Chang.
Oh, sure.
No.
What?
It's all good.
Really?
The high bidder doesn't win. It's who's got the best package. And the receivers and the receivership attorneys and the real estate folks that they specialize in receivership process, they turned that person down and they awarded to the next. Now, what happened there is that Cliff Chang was he offered about $125,000 more than what that property is worth. And he was trying to pick it up to put it in the city's face that you want to take my property, I'm going to take another property and sit on it forever. The thing that he didn't think through carefully is that he's identified that he's got $325,000 to pay for a property that's worth about 200. And so when we're in court to take the old hospital in September, that I can use that against him to tear down his own facility and find him in contempt of court.
Oh, darn. Cool. Nice update.
Yep.
Thank you. I know we got to hurry because that's obviously a cat that needs to eat. I brought my
It's too
copy
late,
of
he ate.
the American
Yeah, he ate already.
I have my American Planning Association magazine. I get a subscription thanks to the city, and I'm happy to share it with anybody who'd like it here on the Planning Commission. And I am going to miss the next 2 meetings, and I'll be sure to let Kathy know also.
Okay.
Anything else, commissioners? Future agenda items?
We're going to have a backlog of stuff as soon as Jeff Mitchum gets here. And thank you, Melanie, for pointing him out originally. And we figured we'd never be able to get him, but you know him. He's great.
I'm
Okay.
happy to have had my little piece in that.
Yep. Thank you.
Do we have any kind of update on the Summit Lofts, what is it, a bakery or something that's supposed to be going in at the front?
Bakery,
Yeah.
coffee shop,
So
and the
it's,
patio. Remember,
Yeah,
you asked about that?
I didn't, hey,
So we're going back to commission comments, or?
Oh, that's right, we
I
already went
was
past that.
trying to move on because there's a hungry cat.
That's
But,
right, sorry.
Not on my leg. But yes, really quickly, it's Theory Coffee Roasters out of Reading. If you haven't had their coffee down there, it's incredible. They are in interior doing interior work. They're putting in an actual fireplace. They are going to put in a bakery where they bake their goods up here. It's going to be extremely, it is going to be one of the nicest spaces in Mount Shasta. They believe they're going to be able to open in October, and given everything they want to do in there, if they're open by Thanksgiving, I'll, you know,
Yeah.
extremely surprised.
You'll eat your cat instead of your cat eating you.
Okay. So no specific future agenda items. I'm going to move to item 8, which is to adjourn our regular Mount Shasta Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, guys.